Hey, boys and girls. Social media is an amazing tool. It connects the world. For some, it's a caring friend that you can share your deepest thoughts and feelings. For others, social media can be your own personal soapbox where you can push the First Amendment to the limit. On Saturday morning, President Trump used his Twitter account to express his frustrations with his failed attempt to undo the Affordable Health Care Act. Trump urged leaders of the Republican controlled chamber to change the rules to a simple 51 vote majority to pass the legislation. Trump said, "They're looking like fools out there," and called the 60 vote requirement a joke. Though it may seem obvious that the president doesn't know how the Republican form of government actually works, he may be onto something. Let's see. In the early years of Congress, representatives as well as senators could filibuster, which, as you could guess, was very time consuming. As the House of Representatives grew, revisions to the House rules limited debate. In the smaller Senate, unlimited debate continued on the grounds that any senator should have the right to speak as long as necessary on any issue. Now, if I know my audience, you're probably wondering, what the fuck is a filibuster? Well, the term filibuster comes from the Dutch word vrijbuter, which means pirate. Yes, pirate. The word became popular in the 1850s when it was applied to efforts to hold the Senate floor in order to prevent a vote on a bill. Historically, vrijbuter or freebooter described a person engaging in unauthorized warfare against a foreign country. Politically, a filibuster is an action such as a prolonged speech that obstructs progress in a legislative assembly while not technically contravening the required procedures. Using the filibuster to delay or block legislative action has a long history. Actually, its birth, like many Americans, was by complete accident. In 1789, the first U.S. Senate adopted rules allowing senators to move the previous question, which meant ending debate and proceeding to a vote. But in 1806, the Senate's preceding officer, Vice President Aaron Burr, argued that the previous question motion was redundant and had only been exercised once in the preceding 4 years and should be eliminated. The Senate agreed, and it modified the rules. It created no alternative mechanism for terminating debate. As a result, the filibuster was born. In the early 19th century, the principle of simple majority voting in the Senate was well established and particularly valued by Southern slaveholding states. New states were admitted to the Union in pairs to preserve the sectional balance in the Senate. Until the late 1830s, however, the filibuster remained a solely theoretical option, never actually exercised. In 1841, during debate on a bill to charter the Second Bank of the United States, Senator Henry Clay tried to end the debate via majority vote, and Senator William R. King threatened the filibuster, saying that Clay may make his arrangements at a boarding house for the winter. Other senators sided with King, and Clay backed down. At the time, both the Senate and the House of Representatives allowed filibusters as a way to prevent a vote from taking place. Subsequent revisions to the House rules limited filibuster privileges in that chamber, but the Senate continued to allow the tactic. In practice, narrow majorities could enact legislation by changing the Senate rules, but only on the first day of the session in January or March. So we'll see what Donnie decides then. In 1917, senators adopt Rule 22. It allowed senators to end a debate by two-thirds majority vote, a device known as cloture. In 1919, the Senate used the new rule to end the filibuster against the Treaty of Versailles. Even with the new cloture rule, Filibusters remained an effective means to block legislation, since two-thirds vote is difficult to get, as President Trump can attest to. Most of the time when the Senate tried to invoke cloture, it failed. It seemed like filibusters were nearly impossible to beat. They were particularly useful to Southern senators who sought to block the civil rights legislation, including anti-lynching legislation, until cloture was invoked after a 60-day filibuster against the Civil Rights Act in 1964. In 1975, the Senate reduced the number of votes required for cloture from two-thirds to three-fifths, or 60, of the current 100 senators. What were you doing in 1975, Mr. President? Senator UEP Long effectively used the filibuster against bills that he thought favored the rich over the poor, reciting Shakespeare and reading his recipes for pot liquors. And Strom Thurmond, well, we talked about him. So to recap, filibustering is the act of bullshitting the Congress for extended periods of time. Now, the act of filibustering, of course, can be helpful to the minority representatives in the House, keeping the majority from passing laws unchecked. Not to mention, it can be quite entertaining. But filibustering has also been used to block passing laws that may have made this country a little less racist. As a matter of fact, the Democrats have a virtual highlight reel for filibustering non-discrimination bills, even against other Democrats. In 1948, Dennis Chavez of New Mexico proposed the creation of a permanent Fair Employment Practices Committee to prevent discrimination in the workplace. The filibuster lasted weeks until Senator Chavez was forced to remove the bill from consideration after a failed cloture vote, even though he had enough votes to pass the bill. Well, when an unpopular president wants to push major social change legislation with a razor-thin majority, it seems to me he lacks the understanding of how democracy is supposed to work. We are not a parliamentary system where if one party receives a majority of votes in an election, they get to decide everything with no checks or balances. We are a republic, intended to operate by consensus. Unfortunately, it's not only President Trump who seems not to understand this. Maybe our president isn't the deal maker that he made himself out to be. Eh, who knows? Anyway, good night, good day, or whatever.